Good afternoon. Everyone all right? Yeah? Oh, that's a good response. So, what are we on? Here we go. So, yeah, my name, as Herb just said in that lovely introduction, is Hannah. Has anyone read the speaker program? Anyone? Yeah, so you've read the speaker program. You might have noticed that I made quite the bold claim. I said, I've been saddled with the least flattering Google autocomplete search term known to man. Just so we go into this talk and you know that I can be trusted on my word, I wanted to prove this to you. If you can just have a quick look at the slides. So this is my name, Hannah Mosley. And this is what Google thinks of me. Oh. So my tattoo work does get mentioned up there, but first of all, Google thinks I'm pretty repulsive. Hopefully my talk is going to enlighten you a little bit as to how I got saddled with this most disappointing of adjectives. So what you need to know about me professionally. I have worked in retail for quite a long time. It's not very interesting, but I really enjoyed it. I really like working with people. I then went on to be lucky enough to study, work, and teach in the field of freelance illustration, which was fantastic. I loved it. I also write quarterly for this magazine. Can we just have a look at the slide? Sorry. I write for a tattoo magazine. This probably doesn't look like what most of you think a tattoo magazine should look like, notable because of its lack of girls with arched backs sucking their fingers and wearing PVC bikinis. It's a slightly different breed of tattoo magazine. And since then, I've been doing well, for the past 2 years, actually, I've been fortunate enough to have my dream job. My dream job since I was about 14 was to actually be a tattooist. And this is pretty much how I feel every day. This is one of my drawings. Drawing is my first love. It's always been there for me. These are a few of my drawings. I really like drawing because I'm not, how to put it, I'm not great with words. And I feel there's parts of my brain that I can only really get out with a pen and paper. I feel like I can communicate more honestly, more truly when I'm drawing. And with that in mind, I probably should have drawn you today's talk, but I wasn't quite sure how I'd get that to work in the format that we see. So you'll just have to bear with my mumblings, and I'm sure you'll get the gist anyway. So yeah, I draw for a living, essentially, which is amazing. I'm very lucky. The thing about freelance illustration was it really allowed me to flex my creative muscles. I got a lot of good jobs. I got to solve some really interesting problems visually. It's really lonely work. I like people, and when you're only communicating with your client every couple of days via email from your bedsit or your mate's kitchen or your mum's spare room, it's really, really lonely. I worked for a couple of years as well in community arts organisations, mostly organising arts event programmes to get particularly kids and young adults, but also like adults involved in arts practice, get them talking to artists, and I loved that. It was amazing. I got to meet loads of people. It didn't leave me a lot of time for the kind of creativity that I could put down with a pen on paper, and I missed that. Tattooing's amazing because it gives me both of those sets of benefits. I spend all my days working one-on-one with clients. I get to make custom pieces of artwork for them, usually custom, and I know that I've got at least a captive audience of one for my work for the rest of that person's life. It's brilliant. These are some of the tattoos that I've been doing. This is actually a client next to the original illustration with the work in progress. This was a really silly one I just had to include because I did this earlier this week. It's still fresh here, but I just enjoyed it so much I had to include it. I've been really lucky there we go. I get to tattoo a massively broad range of people, and it's really been quite informative. I've tattooed people from massively varying cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, people from a broad range of professional backgrounds, and age as well. The youngest person I've ever tattooed would be 18, because that's the legal minimum in the UK to get a tattoo. Even if you've got a note from your mum, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your mum says, you have to be 18 or I get into loads of trouble. The oldest person I've tattooed was 67 at the time, I believe. If there's any octogenarians in the audience who still moisturise, I would really like to hear from you, though. Bearing all this in mind and bearing how informative this experience of tattooing such a broad range of people has been for me over the past 2 years, it might really surprise you when I tell you that I feel one of the greatest gifts I've gained from working at Middleton Tattoo Studio is the gift of discrimination. I discriminate so much more since I started working there. And I should probably qualify that because it sounds quite sinister on the face of it. I don't mean discrimination in the way that we hear the word trotted out in the media so much these days. I don't mean The way we hear it in Uganda, particularly in Russia, in the noisy but minority of southern states in the US. Thank you. I don't mean all of a sudden in the past 2 years I've suddenly turned into some sort of monster who decides I should make tattoos more painful for my gay clients. I don't suddenly decide that I should withhold all my best designs for clients of a particular racial persuasion, because that would be insane. But what I mean is discrimination in its other sense of the word, the less loaded sense of the word, where we mean simply to distinguish one thing from another, to discriminate that which is high quality from that which is not. Why would you do that? Why would you do that is a question where if you're visibly tattooed, or even if your parents just find out you've got a really little tattoo, you might get asked this question a lot. Why would you do that? Why would you do that to yourself? And it's a question that I've been asked a lot. It's a question I've kind of asked myself a lot as well. I have friends and acquaintances within the tattooing and body modification industries who I deem to have more extreme modifications than myself. I'm quite heavily tattooed, but I have acquaintances who, instead of decorating their bodies with ink, they've decorated them with scars, or friends who have decided to permanently split their tongues into two, people who have tattooed the white, the sclera of your eyeballs. And I've looked at these people and I've kind of gone, why would you do that to yourself? Even having been asked the question myself, I have stood there with this kind of idle derision, looked at them, looked at their decisions and gone, why would you do that? Why would you do that could actually be a really powerful question if it was actually a question. It's not, though. I don't believe in this context, why would you do that as a question. It's a statement. And what that statement says is, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't like what you're doing. Your intentions are so obscure to me that they're dubious and badly thought out at best, and even maybe a little sinister at worst. And in this way, I think that is a very sort of basic form of discrimination. You're asking this completely rhetorical question. You have no intention of actually finding out this person's motives, but you've already very quickly passed judgment on them like that. I'd like you to bear this question in mind just as we go on, because, as I say, I think it can be a powerful one. I'm really lucky to work in quite a high-profile studio. My employer opened our studio, Middleton Tattoo Studio, about 32 years ago now. And in the intervening 3 decades, he's created a massive, huge portfolio of really technically amazing work. This portfolio of work has attracted a number of high-profile clients, and those two things together, the portfolio and the high-profile clients, have attracted no small amount of media attention. Because of this, it didn't really surprise me last year when a journalist from the Mirror showed up in our studio looking to do a day-in-the-life type piece about our studio. It made sense. There's a lot of media focus on tattooing at the minute. It was quite an exciting day for me. I was at the end of my apprenticeship, so I hadn't quite gone self-employed yet, but I was tattooing. And that day was particularly exciting for me because I wasn't just tattooing a client, I was getting tattooed myself by my employer. So I got asked questions by the journalist and her photographer from both sides of the coin, both as a tattooist and as a client. I found some of the questions to be quite leading, but I realized that's part of a journalist's job, is to draw out a narrative thread that's going to be accessible and interesting. So I didn't think too much of it at the time. I really wasn't prepared for the tone of the article that resulted from that day, and hopefully my opening gambit from this talk will start to make a bit more sense to you now. The headline of that article read, "Repulsive to some and agony to others. Why are so many women still getting tattooed?" And I read this article and I looked back and remembered my experience that day talking for some 8 to 10 hours with this journalist, and the disparity between these two things just caused me to sort of throw my hands up in the air and go, why would you do that? Why would you publish that? As an example, on the day I was tattooing, I was leant over my client, concentrating very, very hard indeed. And the journalist comes up and says, "Oh, how much would that tattoo cost?" Some pertinent details that you should probably be aware of. My client that day was actually on a long-term leave from work for health issues. So she didn't have a lot of excess money to be sloshing around on a luxury item like a tattoo. And I was an apprentice, so I explained to her that, at this stage of my career, my clients don't pay in cold hard cash, they mostly pay in trust, which is much more powerful currency when you're starting out making permanent marks on someone's body. And the journalist sort of looked at me for a minute and went, "Yeah, but if you were charging, how much would it cost?" And I looked at the work for it and I said, well, I estimate there's probably about 200 to 250 pounds worth of work gone into this tattoo. She went, oh, okay. The article, which you can find if you Google Hannah Mosley repulsive, I totally engineered that tag myself by telling people, because it was the quickest way to direct them to the article without actually sending them the URL for it. It actually reports that my client paid me £400 for this tattoo. Why would you do that? It could have potentially left us both in a really sticky situation. My client, who was in a slightly financially precarious position at the time, having to explain how and why she could justify this exorbitant expense on a luxury item, and me explaining why at this early stage in my career I was charging nearly twice the going rate for the amount of work that was clearly featured in the photograph, along with my latex gloved hands sort of artfully posing a tattoo machine above her shoulder. Fortunately, I got out of it scot-free because I wasn't named as the artist. I am named in the article and my face is featured and my hands are featured tattooing this woman, but when I am mentioned, I'm only mentioned as an illustrator and a client, because apparently she didn't have the faith that her readers could get their head around someone being tattooed and a tattooist at the same time. In fact, despite purporting to be about the growing trend of women getting heavily tattooed, or tattooed at all, the article completely neglects to mention that of the 5 artists working at our quite well-known studio, 3 of them are women. Completely neglects to mention that. What it did manage to mention was a lot of tattooed female celebrities. It mentioned them loads. And the writer makes quite clear an inference between these celebrities' influence over our female clients, because apparently that's what women are looking for. We are the typical ink seeker, it reads, is inspired by celebrity culture. There's also a very clear inference that our average female client is not capable of the foresight to consider how this might affect her in her later years. The tone was patronizing at best, and it was absolutely dripping with, why would you do that? To her credit, the journalist seemed quite interested in why I would do that. In this instance, it was why I would have most of my arm covered in a design that depicts a snake and an apple branch with an apple blossom coming off of it. She seemed really interested in why I had chosen to do that, and the conversation went something like this. So, does it mean you're into rock music? And I said, well, I don't know how to put this, but I'm not too proud to admit publicly you're more likely to find me singing Rihanna in the shower than AC/DC. She didn't seem terribly impressed by this, but she pushed on undeterred. Does it signify some sort of affiliation with a group? And I really hate to disappoint, so I totally squirmed in my seat, and I was like, well, no, unless that group is people with snake and apple tattoos. And then she looked at me quite stoically and just sort of said, look, I'm just really interested in the story behind it. I went, really? She went, yeah, really. I was like, oh, well, that's different. And I got really excited then because I got to tell her all about like this fascination I've got with Judeo-Christian mythology and how fascinating I found the story of, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and what a strange concept I thought it was, and the story of Adam and Eve. And if you go even further back to Talmudic texts and Assyrian and Babylonian texts, how you see that Eve wasn't Adam's first wife, but his second wife originally. Apparently, he had a wife called Lilith who was crafted out of dust and equal to him, instead of Eve, who was crafted from his bone and made to be subservient to him, and she wasn't writing any of it down. She just was staring at me blankly with her, and no shorthand was coming out of that pen. So I stopped, felt a little bit embarrassed, and she just looked at me and went, did you want something scary? And I laughed and said, yeah, you know what, actually, it is so much easier getting a double seat on a bus to yourself when you've got a massive snake tattooed down your arm. So much easier. And we laughed. And then I got tattooed, and we left it at that. In the article, I'm actually quoted as saying, I get my tattoos and I like my tattoos because they make people talk and because I wanted something scary. And you know what, to say that I felt misquoted, misrepresented, and a bit maligned is probably a little bit melodramatic. But I did feel a certain sadness that the person I actually am didn't make the grade for this article, because apparently there was only a vacancy in this short piece for I don't know who she was looking for, but it wasn't me. It was some rock music loving gangbanger who had a sob story worthy of X Factor behind their tattoo, and that just wasn't me, so I didn't make the grade. And obviously, it's totally worth mentioning that I am not guilty of having a personal axe to grind here. I am not a paragon of virtue and objectivity here. I mean, to put it into context, if you search Hannah Mosley repulsive, can't say that enough, the article will appear, and my arm is described as looking like a large roll of pastry. The photo that they featured of me, right, my mum loves me. My mum thinks the sun just shines out of me. Even she said that I looked pretty rough in the photo of me that they featured getting tattooed. So obviously, you know, I'm not innocent here. I'm very, very subjective in this matter. But the whole experience really drove home to me a number of ideas that we all know abstractly. We all know up here, you can't believe everything you read. We all know that the media's got an agenda of its own, and we all know that a quote taken out of context can be a really dangerous thing, but it really, really drives it home when it's your quote that's taken out of context. But you know, there's this thing, people are looking for a sexy story. Working at the studio I do, I've fielded a number of phone calls from magazines, from newspapers, from television stations, not just in the UK, further afield as well. And there seems to be a pattern to the requests that these producers of media have for us. What they ask for with alarming regularity is, can we have the details of your clients who have controversial tattoos, who have celebrity-obsessed tattoos or celebrity-inspired if they're being more diplomatic? Can we have the details of your clients who have large-scale, publicly visible work? Can we have the details of your clients that you think have regrettable work done? There's particular interest in these clients if they're between the ages of 18 and 24. As if that's the mainstay of our business, as if what we do all day is aim to help and facilitate young people make decisions we believe to be regrettable. Because apparently, these programs, and I'm sure some of you at least will have seen programs like My Tattoo Hell, these come under the field of human interest, okay? But apparently it's not human interesting enough to feature people who are tattooed and then aren't negatively impacted by it, who just go on and live a life, maybe a really productive life, maybe a life just completely uncoloured by their decision to get tattooed. It's not enough unless we can ring the dinner bell for the public to come along, look at these people and judge them, judge their decisions, judge their character, judge their moral fibre, and judge their intellect. Why would you do that? You know, as I mentioned, there's documentaries like My Tattoo Hell, My Tattoo Addiction, and they have, in the past year especially, become particularly popular. They've gotten a lot of coverage. There's media outlets, you know, as diverse as BBC Breakfast and Newsnight who have really picked up on this popularity. And it's made it really easy, from inside the industry at the very least, to see exactly how the media can act as like a lens. You know, I work in quite a closeted community. I don't get out much, so seeing it from the inside out really changed my view on it. You really see that in some instances, media can act as a lens to completely caricature reality. It distorts things, it exaggerates the blemishes, the bits you don't feel are representative. The things that lie directly beyond the obvious don't really get a look in. At its worst, it creates freaks and bogeymen where real people are standing. My only theory as to why you would do that, and it is just a theory because at the end of the day I'm a tattooist, you know, I'm not a critic of media, I'm not a critic of culture. I draw on people for a living. My only theory as to why you would do that is that there's some innate value in having an audience that can look at a group and go, thank God it's not me. Thank God I'm not in that state. Thank God our decisions were made better. And there's this sort of very subtle, pervasive sense that outside, full of idiots, loads of idiots out there, you better be really careful. Because if you wander too far off the beaten path, you might end up surrounded by them, or worse yet, you might end up one of them. You might end up the very object of ridicule on your screen. You might end up the object of ridicule in the metro that you read on your morning commute. Why would you do that? You know what? It's not Watergate. It's really not Watergate. But it does act as, you know, it acts as a really powerful, if maddening reminder of how things are presented to us. I mean, let's put this into perspective. If the media can be bothered doing this kind of jiggery-pokery with something as frivolous as tattoo culture, and I say that knowing that tattoo culture is my lifeblood and my livelihood, but ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, it's frivolous. If they're doing this kind of manipulation with this kind of frivolous information? What about the information where someone really has something to gain? What about the information that really packs a punch, has political heft to it? Again, let's put it in perspective. I mean, I'm sat here whinging about honesty and transparency in a UK red top. It completely pales into insignificance when you look at the sort of deception and secrecy unveiled by the likes of Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning. But it serves as a really powerful, if maddening reminder that we live in this super, super information-rich world. We're bombarded with information every day, and all of that information, especially the free information, comes with an agenda. And we can't forget that. In that kind of world, discrimination isn't a bad trait. Discrimination is absolutely vital to start making sense of it. And it is the first step in this proper Sisyphean task of making sense of how the world around us is presented to us and why. And we need to ask, why would you do that? Why would you tell me that? Why would you show me that? Who's got a vested interest there? I think if we can start asking that question and asking it without having made up our minds already as to why they would do that, we might actually start to get somewhere. I try and do it, and it's helped me look a bit more objectively at my morning paper. It might even help some of you out there understand why eventually your teenage daughter decides she absolutely has to have that tattoo of a rose on her hip, which might be more pressing to your day-to-day life than understanding why your paper says what it says. Can we just pop the slide up again? Just an example of the why would you do that question as well. This actually popped up on my Facebook feed whilst I was writing this talk. And it's an old co-worker of mine is going, why would you do that to yourself? I don't think she meant it, but I think maybe you guys could ask the question properly if you ever get the opportunity. I'd like to thank you very much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. It's been an honor being up here. You can find my work at hannahmosley.co.uk. If anyone has anything they'd like to add to the conversation, I'd be really interested to hear from you. You can tweet me at milktoothmose. You can find my details on my website. Thank you again so much for having me.